It all started with a single hammer through the wall. This is the story of how I turned this formal front room into this soundproof drum studio. Now, I don't have a trade and I'm not that handy on the tools, but I'm happy to have a go at stuff within reason, so I thought I'd do the demolition myself. Once that first hammer was through the wall, it was go time. Demolition isn't that hard, but it is a bit dusty and messy. With a bit of elbow grease though, I was able to get the room back to its bare bones. So we're just going to do a bit of a test. We've got a sound meter from eBay, I guess. And I'm just going to play some drums in the room, and then we're going to go outside and see how loud they are. Then hopefully when all the studio and all the soundproofing is done, we can kind of figure out how much good we've done. Hopefully we can beat those numbers when we're finished. But next up was the first stage of construction. I'm putting in these panels of gyprock as an outer skin, and this is where I'm trying to seal up the room and stop any sound escaping at all. So all I'm doing is just measuring up in between the studs and then going, and it's pretty easy to cut. I'm just chopping out these big rectangles and then popping them in, and I'm gonna seal them in nice and tight. Now, I'm not a particularly good handyman, so if I'm off with my measurements, I've got this guy here to just scrape down the edges a little bit. And if I undercut it by too much, I'm just gonna fill it with sealant. I'm sealing the pool so no sound gets out. I've been working on the outer skin of the walls for about 2 days and I'm nearly done, so that means I'm gonna have to move up into the ceiling, and this is where it's gonna get really finicky. But I just wanted to mention the type of plasterboard that I'm using for the walls. It's a fire-rated plasterboard that's called Firestop. It's just a little bit more dense than usual plasterboard, and if I could have, I would have got the 16mm version, but they're completely out of stock and it's on back order for months. So I've gone with the 13mm, and then I'm gonna use Soundstop as like a sandwich to hopefully grab different frequencies when we're working on the soundproofing. I used Sikaflex 11FC, which apparently has some sound dampening qualities. I wasn't particularly careful and I went a little bit overboard using it and ended up spending nearly $1,000 on sealant alone. If you're a bit more careful and a little bit more neat, you could definitely save some money there. But as you can see, I'm trying to seal everything up as airtight as possible so no air gets out and therefore no sound escapes either. It took about 10 days of chopping out all those little panels, especially the ceiling was pretty tedious. There were lots of little finicky bits, but I haven't left any gaps at all. So I'm pretty happy that it's completely sealed up. Next up, I need an electrician to get the power points in the right spot and the air conditioning, and then I'm going to order some insulation to put in between the walls. I'm up to insulating in between the walls before I put 2 more layers of plasterboard on. Now, finding this insulation took me weeks and weeks because everywhere is out of stock of the usual things that you would usually use. What I've found is some polyester stuff, and a local mob here make it. So I'm thinking that it's definitely going to do the job, and luckily it's not itchy and it's pretty easy to cut and install. So I guess that's what I'm doing today. This was a reasonably easy step. I read online that a serrated kitchen knife was a pretty good tool for cutting this type of insulation, and it mostly did the job. You can also tear it by hand, but it's a bit harder to get straight. Once I'd filled up all of the walls with insulation, the sound in the room was really dead, which was awesome. So far, I've been able to have a crack at all of the stages up till now. But next, I needed to install a door in that big open entryway. I ordered an extra wide double door frame, and I needed a builder's help to install it. Luckily, I found a great guy who ended up being up for all of my crazy ideas and helped out heaps throughout the rest of the project. Although his labor costs did end up adding up by the end of the project, for me, it was totally worth it. But if you were a bit more handy, that's a place that you could make quite a bit of savings. Once the door frame was in, my next project for the build-up was these ventilation boxes. I found the plans online from soundproofing experts Ultraphonic, and all these ventilation boxes do is force air and therefore sound through 3 lanes of insulation before they reach the outside of the room. As you can see, I got the ventilation boxes in the ceiling with the help of a builder. They're pretty great, and one of them has an exhaust fan in one end. That's gonna suck the air out, and then the other end is gonna draw air back in, so even if I'm in there for 12 hours straight, I'll still have enough air and I won't pass out. The next step was hanging the ceiling. A drumming mate of mine had recommended these specifically engineered clips to isolate the ceiling from the rest of the house. I was umming and ahhing about using these brackets for ages, and they have worked out quite expensive, but I hope that they do the job in terms of soundproofing. There's a bedroom right upstairs from this room, so I'm trying to isolate this room from the structure of the house as much as possible. These brackets are going to attach to the joist of the ceiling. Then there's a big rubber stopper here that's going to isolate and really take out as much of the vibration as possible. These clips down the bottom will have a channel running through them, like a furring channel, and then the plasterboard sheets are going to attach to that furring channel. So it's kind of like a suspended ceiling, separate from the rest of the house. As I said, fairly expensive, but I'm hoping that it keeps it nice and isolated so it does the job in terms of soundproofing. It was another fiddly step, especially after realizing I had assembled them wrong, but once it was all done, I was very happy with the setup. Time to start putting the ceiling up. I hired a panel lift for this next step, which worked out pretty cheap. Since the plasterboard I'm using is quite dense, it's also very heavy, and working above your head is also really awkward, so this little hire fee was well worth it. The pink plasterboard is the fire stop I mentioned earlier, and the green stuff is the more dense sound stop. In between the layers, I used green glue. Now, this product is somewhat controversial because it is very expensive and the benefits are slightly mysterious. To break it down quickly, it's a glue that never sets. It stays tacky for its lifetime, and what that does is instead of having your two plasterboard sheets attached to each other and vibrating and resonating as one solid mass, it provides a buffer so that each sheet resonates separately and therefore significantly improves the soundproofing. At this point in the renovation, I figured I was in for a penny, in for a pound, so I might as well use the good stuff. But there are other options like mass-loaded vinyl, or some guys online have even tried carpet glue instead of green glue, and you could check that out if you're on a budget. Once the ceiling was up, it was time to give the walls the same treatment. A tradesman shortage meant it was a bit of a wait for plasterers. Again, this is a step that you could do yourself, but I just feel like there's a little bit of craftsmanship and art to it, so I thought I'd leave it to the professionals. Then it was back to things I could do myself, like painting. I don't mind painting once I get a roll on, and I'm really happy with the color choice and how the whole room turned out. On the home stretch, I had carpet installed and an electrician friend install the lights and aircon. I decided on carpet because the ceiling is standard height and the room is not huge, so carpet will take out a lot of reflections in the space. The door guys came and installed the doors, and then the final step was my giant window. I wanted to keep the window as much as possible for the facade of the house and the nice light that it brings into the room. Somewhere in my research, someone mentioned Perspex or clear acrylic as being a good option. When I looked into it further, the biggest sheet of clear acrylic I could get was just under the size of the window. So we built up a little ledge at the bottom of the window and then installed an 8mm and a 10mm thick pane with a 20mm air gap in between each. It's not a perfect solution in terms of soundproofing, but it is excellent for what I needed it to do. And now I'm in. I can practice for hours and no complaints from the neighbors. And it's just a lovely space to be in that makes me want to go in and practice. I think the project will continue as I acoustically treat the space for sound, maybe install curtains and find the best kit placement for videos and recording. Although it was a headache at times with supply shortages and tradesman shortages and figuring out what the next step should be, now that it's done and done pretty well, it was 100% worth it. We better check that decibel meter again, and I'll see you in the next drum video soon.